RiseAbsorb is redefining what growers expect from phosphate fertilizer. Backed by data and built for performance, RiseAbsorb helps reduce phosphorus losses, improve uptake, and boost ROI without increasing input costs. Join the next wave of growers switching to the next generation of phosphorus fertilizers by visiting phospholutions.com.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. And, of course, as always, huge shout-out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. Well, it's been quite the week. It has actually been a nutty week, and I actually love it because there's been so many things to think about, to cover, connect dots on, provide perspective, provide that insight, and give you an idea on what myself and the entire team is thinking about some of these issues. And we'll be able to do that on today's show as well, as we've got a RealAg Issues Panel. Tyler McCain, Managing Director of CAPI, Lyndsey Smith and Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture are standing by, and we're going to rip it today. It's going to be fantastic. Looking forward to, I think there's some disagreement on some of the issues with the panel today, so I think it's well worth you tuning in here for sure. We'll also be joined by the president of the Canadian Cattle Association, Tyler Fulton, and he's going to address the decision that was made earlier this week. You heard Doug Ruxborough, the chair of Alberta Beef Producers, ABP, on the show earlier this week, where he talked about ABP announcing their intention to withdraw from the CCA. Tyler's going to get a chance to respond to that here today. What does he see as the gap, and what needs to happen going forward to maybe change ABP's position on that? That has been a big deal this week in Canadian cattle politics indeed. On the panel, we'll talk about it. We'll also talk about trade related to Canada and China and big challenges this week when it comes to tariffs on Canadian canola going into China, as many of you have heard throughout this week here and other places. So if you have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. And of course, we have a bonus segment today because we're not going to be able to pack it all into one show. So if you're listening to the RealAg Radio podcast, you can hear the bonus segment where we just riff and we continue the conversation with the RealAg Issues Panel. Let's take a break. When we come back, we got Tyler Fulton of CCA right after this.
Kosher sucks.
Big time. And hate it. Really gets in the way. Awful.
But not anymore. Get a head start on tough-to-kill weeds like kochia this fall with Volterra EZ and Fierce EZ Soil Active Herbicide. Apply after harvest before freeze-up for up to 8 weeks of extended control in pulses, soybeans, and wheat next spring. Volterra EZ, Fierce EZ for kochia. Visit newfarm.ca/kochia.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
The new Brandt XT grain cart delivers unmatched forward auger reach, side auger reach, and discharge spout clearance for easy positioning, with sight lines that allow you to actually see what you're doing while you're doing it, saving you time with each load and getting you back to the combine sooner. They say hindsight is 20/20. We say seeing what's in front of you is better. Lead the field with the new XT grain cart from Brandt.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. Now we're going to hear a portion of my conversation with Tyler Fulton. He is president of the Canadian Cattle Association. We did this interview on Thursday, August 14th. This is related to ABP announcing their withdrawal from the Canadian Cattle Association. Tyler gives a CCA perspective. Let's listen to a portion of that conversation.
Oh, thanks for having me. Yeah, interesting times, I guess, is one way of describing it. But I appreciate the opportunity to share exactly what's happening for all of our stakeholders.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess off the top, when did CCA find out that ABP was making this decision?
Yeah, really, it was early this week. I understand following a special delegate meeting that they had. They called an emergency meeting, gave us about an hour's notice, and told us that it was their plan to withdraw the membership as of July 1st, 2026. It was a pretty short meeting. Very surprising. And, I don't think I need to say it, but, really disappointing as well.
So some of the points that ABP has made is that they have concerns about some of the representation in regards to, 50 or 55% of the revenue and not enough board seats. Is that something that has come up in the negotiations?
So yeah, I know that Doug had made reference to the interim agreement that CCA and ABP had, in addressing really shortfalls and the problems with respect to like market dynamics and refunding. That ended in July, or that will end in July of 26. And so we were kind of engaged in what the one iteration of this looked like. In particular, our semi-annual meeting is coming up the second week of September. It was, really one of the primary agenda items at that meeting because, we needed to address, honestly, ABP relayed, fairly recently, like in July and June, that they wanted to, revisit kind of what the long-term funding arrangement is, and they also said and made mention of the fact that they also think that we have to review and consider changes to the representation that ABP had on CCA.
What about some of the comments regarding transparency? Now, he made it very clear they're not asserting that there's been a misuse of funds there, but they're looking for clarity. And one of the things that he had referenced was the need for a finance chair. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about what is the structure here? Because I've had a few members of the audience that have said, "Wait a minute, CCA doesn't have a finance chair. What's going on here?" So can you shed some light there?
Yeah. So let me start by saying the organizational structure of CCA is really complex. There's several different divisions, some of which are funded by National Checkoff, others that are not. And then of course, there's, a core part that is, charged with advocacy and a portion of that is lobbying. And what makes it really difficult is because it's such a complicated structure, it makes it difficult. You can't explain it simply. There's just not an easy way to do it. And I think that exacerbated the problem. Rightly so, I think the board of CCA and its members should be focused on what the priorities are of the industry, of the organization, and how to allocate the finite resources that we have to them. And it's generally been kind of split out by, committee. From an accounting standpoint, honestly, 6 times a year, directors get an 80-page really document of our current financials. That's in addition to our audited financial statements, of which part of that has an audit committee, a member audit committee that is struck annually. That's not the same as, as what the purpose of a finance chair would be, as I've now come to understand it. I think what's really clear to me now is that there was not an obvious avenue to address this. We didn't have a finance committee. We were always just, relying on our accounting staff and our controller to provide all this information, because, in large part, because it is so complex and there's so many nuances to it.
Okay. So is this do you feel that there is an appetite to make alterations to this structure, or is this like a red line, so to speak?
No, not at all. I think it's a legitimate concern. It wasn't obvious, to me as to, how to address it, but, I had already started, a process of really trying to convert the accounting, data, for lack of a better word, into, usable information to help us make decisions on priorities. And it's something that I really, considered it, of all of my responsibilities, it was one of my top three, and directly related to the ABP funding and organizational structure issue. So totally seems in line with something that we can get behind.
One thing we heard from Doug, chair of ABP, was that he had stated that, I don't want to put, I'm paraphrasing, I'm not quoting him directly, but there was a desire to fix this trajectory, for ABP to not leave CCA, and he even admitted that this is, we're trying to get some attention here. This is a negotiating tactic. He said that. Are you confident that we can reconcile some of the differences here, and we can have a situation where ABP is still a member of CCA in July of 26?
So, 100%, that is my desire. And it's early days. I did see the interview, that you did with Doug, and I feel much more confident now, because we didn't really have a great deal of context as to, what triggered that initial decision. They've provided some more details, recently, and I don't see any issues, really in trying to work through that. But I want to make it clear that, Alberta is one, of the largest funder of CCA. We also have all the other provinces that contribute themselves. And so, I wouldn't say that CCA, has the authority to unilaterally, decide and negotiate. I think it has to involve the other provinces as well. But based on the additional information and context that that they've provided, I am optimistic. I'm really optimistic that we're going to be able to come to a solution to this, and I think that we're motivated. I think both ABP and CCA is motivated to do that, because we think that that's the most effective way to advocate on with a national, a unified national voice.
How did we get to this point? Because what I'm hearing from you is there's been some clarity provided this week, and so I am somewhat curious as to were these concerns not communicated, or maybe this is a different way of putting it, or what? How did we get to this point this week? In your opinion, obviously you can't speak for them, but you can speak for yourself.
Yeah, that's I mean, I've asked myself that question because it shocked me when we received the news. I think it is fair that we've been in the relationship has been strained because it's been really a dynamic environment with respect to cattle numbers and cattle and refunding happening in different provinces. And so there's different dynamics at play there. In my mind, we were on track to address this, and it was, I think a goal of the board of directors to really come to a more permanent solution on it. And so it was quite striking to me that, they hit the nuclear button the way that they did. But sometimes there's a narrative that develops that says, well, we really need to shake things up. And I think what probably the delegates that were not around the CCA table didn't know is that we were already invested and addressing it as as I said, the primary agenda item in our semi-annual meeting.
One of the things that I've heard a lot from the audience, Tyler, is concern if there is not a deal that is made. And I've heard this from a few people out of province, out of Alberta, that have said, okay, what happens to CCA and what happens to, when I say us, I mean those still left as members, what happens to this entity if 55% of the revenue walks out the door?
Yeah. So I think it'd be fair to say, well, it's very fair to say that it's my motivation to work through this and get ABP, back and confident and address their concerns. But if for some reason they didn't and we couldn't come to some agreement, then I think we'd have to explore some different models or options on how to advocate on behalf of all beef producers in Canada. Quite simply, we've received a lot of support, really in the last couple of days, with the sentiment that we'll make sure that you're okay. And, there's obviously some large funders out there, and, the other provinces. There's different measures, but quite simply, it is a worse. We would all be worse off, I think, if CCA wasn't representing the beef producers of Alberta, because they make up the majority of it. I mean, it's just the reality of it, and it's something across the country that we're all proud of.
Yeah. When is there scheduled talks to happen? I guess, what are the next steps from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously really early days, but it is absolutely my desire to kind of engage in this, as this obviously lifts the priority. It was already one of my top three, but I guess we got to juggle the balls, right? And so yeah. I don't want to go into great detail. I spoke with Doug Roxburgh yesterday in person. We have a really good relationship. He sat on the board of CCA for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, and I really found him to be a thoughtful, engaged, individual that that was willing to share his opinions on things. He doesn't currently sit on CCA, but we've built a relationship, I think, previously, and it's one that I think we can really lever to work through some of these things.
Tyler, I want to thank you for joining us here today. I know that I'm kind of taking you away from probably trying to build the strategy out and plan out what some of the next steps are, but I do appreciate you taking time for the Real Agriculture audience.
No, I appreciate the opportunity. I know that this really kind of shook things up, and it's I want to reassure all of the beef producers across the country that it doesn't change our motivation and our work. We really take pride in advocating and being effective, and so we're motivated to fix this so that we can continue to do that good work.
We're going to get the RealAg Issues Panel perspective on what we just heard from Tyler Fulton of CCA. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Everyone has questions about their farm. From general inquiries to in-depth fertilizer questions, it can be hard to find straightforward answers, let alone ones that apply to your operation. That's exactly why Economics was created. Our team sifts through the endless stream of agronomic information so you don't have to, providing relevant answers, one-of-a-kind tools, and easy-to-implement advice all in one place. Find your answers at nutrient-economics.com.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is a video series that showcases the latest in canola research and production agronomy. Learn from some of the best at your own pace through quick and timely producer-focused videos available on our YouTube channel. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is the quickest way to keep up to date on all the latest in canola production. Boost your canola IQ with the Canola School, brought to you by BASF, and visit canolaschool.com.
The Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com has everything you need to get your crop off to a great start and a strong finish. Whether you're growing chickpeas, faba beans, lentils, or peas, you'll get all the latest and best agronomic information at PulseSchool.com. A library of top-notch agronomy videos from industry experts available on demand at your fingertips. Visit the Pulse School, brought to you by BASF on RealAgriculture.com.
Let's get going with the RealAg Issues Panel here on RealAg Radio. Up first, Lyndsey Smith, coming out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, how are we doing?
Well, I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing great. I said at the opening of the show that this has been a week to remember, and I'm not complaining. I actually really enjoyed it, and the adrenaline of trying to make sure that we covered all the different issues that happened puts a lot of stress on us as a team to make it happen. This is like, we talk about harvest being a stressful time for farmers. A week like this is like our harvest, and it has definitely put us to the test.
It's like harvest and everything's ready at the same time, and the combine broke down. That's what
yes, exactly.
That's more like what this is. I was going through, before we came on air, I was going through trying to find some stories so that I could look at them while we were talking and sound really smart. And I had to, I was paging through, and it was still this week's posts on the website. It's just been, so hats off to the RealAg team. Everyone has been just absolutely running this week. It feels like, 3 weeks in one based on the news, and just so many different sectors, right? It's been all over. So anyway, we're tired, but it's good. It's exciting.
It's all good. That's what we're here for. Kelvin Heppner coming out of Altona, Manitoba. Kelvin, great to chat with you.
Likewise, good to be here. And speaking of harvest, it is slowly starting here in southern Manitoba. Expecting it to ramp up here over the next few days, though. So getting rolling.
Yeah, fall is, the nighttime lows are getting a little bit lower. It's starting. It just, there's the odd day. It's like, ooh, fall's a little bit in the air, just a little bit.
Our kids were at a girls' hockey camp this week, so I got to spend some time in the arena, reestablishing my winter social life routines this week. So feels like fall is around the corner. Should be.
Yeah.
Summer's flying by.
Also joining us is the managing director at the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute, better known as CAPI. It is Tyler McCain. How are we doing, Tyler?
I'm doing well, Shaun. Great to be with you. It was a low of 14 last night in the Ottawa Valley, and so it was great sweater weather to be working with 4-H projects, and we're going to get some warm weather again on the weekend, but fall definitely here.
I'm surrounded by people that enjoy cooler weather than what I would consider to be normal. I'm on an island here in today's grouping. Hey, Lyndsey, who is this segment brought to you by?
Oh, well, thank you for asking, Shaun. We are, speaking of cooler weather, We're going to think about November and the American Dairy Expo. So dairy producers wanted for the first American Dairy Expo, November 5th and 6th at the Champlain Valley Exposition in Vermont. Grab a free breakfast, tour the 200 Company Dairy Innovation Trade Show, meet Olympian and dairy producer Elle St. Pierre, and take in the Dairy Delivers classroom. Full details, discount coupon, and pre-expo tickets are available at AmericanDairyExpo.com. That's XPO for Dairy Expo.
Yeah, and if you've ever been to the Canadian Dairy Expo, this is the new American version, and Vermont in the fall sounds gorgeous. That's one of the states I've never been to.
It's not far from where I live and where Tyler lives, as the crow flies.
Yeah,
They're very close.
Absolutely. Okay, so in the last segment, we heard from Tyler Fulton, the president of the Canadian Cattle Association. Lyndsey, we've heard this week from ABP. So what we have ABP saying that, giving a ultimatum essentially to CCA, say, hey, we need some changes here on a couple different fronts. If not, we are going to withdraw a portion of our funding and leave as a member of CCA. What did you hear in Fulton's response to ABP?
So, it's really interesting to me that it could get to sort of this point. I think I would love to know when the dust settles on all this, sort of the series of events that sort of took place to get us here, because it does feel kind of going from, behind the scenes discontent all the way to sort of like the very extreme, as you mentioned, sort of ultimatum option, which feels like we maybe skipped a couple steps in there. So I did hear from Tyler, though, it does sound very much like I think both sides seem to have at least now anyway, a pretty good picture, I guess, where the pinch points are between the two groups. And if that's the case, there is time. I think we've got runway here, and Tyler does seem confident that, putting this as a priority, knowing what the pinch points are, that he's optimistic that they can put this back together, which I think, honestly, for the Canadian cattle industry is a positive thing. So I was surprised, I think, really, and I don't think I'm alone in this one this week, that we sort of went from kind of not hearing much to Alberta's out, which just feels like just pretty extreme right off the hop.
And Kelvin, I guess one of the things that struck me was the fact this is in the beef industry. We know across the agricultural sector, there are some challenges with some of the provincial organizations, with the national orgs. We've seen issues around the Canola Council, Cereals Canada. But this is the beef industry where really a lot of the profitability is right now. And there's obviously some concern about dollars, amounts, where it's going, all of those kinds of things. It does provide some interesting timing.
Yeah, often we see pressure like this or stressors like this descent when margins are tight, and that is the case in a lot of agriculture, but not necessarily in the beef and cattle sector right now. Just like on any sports team, when you're winning, things are good, and when you're losing, that's when the descent sets in. And so it is a bit surprising to see it in the cattle sector now. Not only was the announcement this week a surprise, but to me, the fact that it at least seems like there's got to be more to the story, because like Lyndsey said, it seems there could have been more communication before reaching the nuclear option. I'm not sure from which party, or if that involves both parties in terms of communicating the asks and the issues that need to be resolved before threatening withdrawal. And I'm curious, Shaun, you mentioned this is kind of cattle politics, or the style of cattle politics, to be more blunt and direct in terms of achieving what you want in negotiations. I'm curious what the rebuilding of trust looks like. If there's a lot of hope and optimism here, like we heard from Tyler Fulton just barely, that ABP, Alberta Beef, stays in CCA when that deadline comes next summer, and what is it, 55% of CCA's budget or something like that comes from Alberta Beef. So that has major implications for the future of CCA. What's the reestablishment of trust look like after that? After you have a messy public threaten to withdraw, how do you reestablish trust from both parties? And maybe in cattle politics, it's easier to reestablish trust around the table than it might be in other sectors as well. I'm not sure.
Tyler, what do you think? What are your thoughts as you've been following it this week?
You know, when I worked in politics, people used to say, "How did you get involved in politics?" And I used to say, "I grew up on a farm, and politics are never very far away from the farm kitchen table." And that seemed to be pretty well at play this week in Alberta. You know, it's always unfortunate when associations and producers and different groups and members aren't on the same page, but it's not a huge surprise either. Like, there are differences across the country, there are differences within a province, there are different needs, perspectives that come at play. But I really do think that this is, like, cattle is the flashpoint today, but last year it was kind of businesses leaving Cereals Canada. We've seen kind of that membership effectively hollow out. I worked at Grain Growers of Canada for a year, and part of what we were trying to do there was bring Quebec, Ontario, Saskatchewan grain groups into that national association because they weren't there. We did, and then 2 years later, GFO left. Like, there are these things that happen, and I think in this, never mind, kind of setting aside the good, maybe economics in the beef industry, like, we're in a difficult world, right? Like, this is a challenging space, and if you look at the kind of the journey that the beef industry's gone through, where they put a lot of focus on sustainability, that's been a big push. I think that there is some sense that that's maybe not delivered the outcomes that they want. I think a question around what comes next. Part of the interesting dynamics in the beef world, right, is the reason why things are good is because the industry is not growing. What does that look like? At what point do you start to see kind of more of an optimism for, okay, we're actually going to see the beef industry start to grow again? I think, like, all of those things are at play there, but it comes down to, we need producers, we need people, we need leaders like Tyler and Doug that are going to get together and figure this out and kind of work through the politics of how do you make these national associations work, because producers in this country need national associations that can get things done for them.
Yeah, you know, to the lobbying fact, you know, I heard from a number of people in national orgs in other commodities who were really kind of taken aback because CCA, maybe next to DFC, the Dairy Farmers of Canada, would be considered maybe one of the most successful lobby organizations relative to having outcomes they could brag about. And one of them it brought up is the front to package labeling as an example. And of course, you go back to the history, like, you know, obviously a lot of work on BSC. So I think it's a kind of a uncomfortable week for everybody. Like, if this can happen at CCA, what about our group? I think it kind of a bit of a wake up call there as well. I also, Kelvin, you mentioned the trust, and I guess at some level though, the discussion about the future or what needs to happen or whether it's change or the context, the structure of all this, it's also healthy. Now we could argue about the methods of getting to that, you know, that improvement. And I think that's what a lot of people are probably questioning here this week. Before we take a break, Lyndsey, you always tell me that words matter. I think, you know, one of the criticisms I would have of the messaging from ABP is the use of the word transparent. It doesn't look like they're looking for transparency on how money's being spent. They're looking for clarity. And the use of the word transparency has taken the conversation for many people. They have a different perception about what ABP is actually talking about.
Yeah, and so that I think is one of the things that, and in that interview with ABP, which I think is really important, is you ask him to clarify, you know, ABP is not saying that there has been a misuse of funds and not relaying that, but it could be misconstrued as that, the way it was sort of presented at first. And so it is very true that our words matter, especially when they're sent out publicly and, you know, everybody's going to read this, listen to this, and you're trying to communicate this. So I think that it is incredibly important to recognize, you know, that it's clarity on how funds are distributed, the decisions that go into where those funds go and the amounts, et cetera. And to Tyler's point, sort of the strategy going forward. I mean, the cattle industry, potentially from a cow-calf perspective, may have stabilized, right? We may not be talking about more head, which is how these checkoffs are paid. So if that's the case going forward, there needs to be clarity on the funds coming in and how those funds get spent. And so I think it is really important to hit on that point, that it's about clarity, not necessarily any, alluding to any wrongdoing on the financial side.
McCann, did you have a thought that you're trying to say there?
You talked about groups that can brag for accomplishments. I think that there is going to clearly be increasing pressure on associations to be able to demonstrate the impact that their advocacy efforts have. I think that sometimes there's a temptation in agriculture lobby circles to measure your impact based on the number of meetings that you have. I think that that is a terrible way to do that. And I think that groups need to much more clearly be able to say, this is actually what I've done. That doesn't always mean getting a policy win, but that means being able to say, this is the work that I've done on your behalf. And I really hope that some of those people that we're talking to you, Shaun, are spending some more time thinking internally about how do we more clearly communicate to our members what we're doing for them, whether or not it's in Ottawa or in a provincial capital.
I will save everybody from the soapbox rant. I 100% agree. And this is much this. If you and I'll just do the comparison. If you compare the communication of how checkoff dollars are spent and what they're going to and what they're accomplishing in the U.S., it is fundamentally different than the discreetness and the modesty and the humbleness that happens in Canada. And I think Canadian groups need to brag and talk more about the things that they're doing, more about the things that they think they're accomplishing because of the use of producer dollars. So that's I'll save everybody the longer version of that rant. Let's take a break here on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
At Proven Seed, we know that farming in Western Canada doesn't just teach us, it shapes us. Here we face challenges with resilience, innovation, and grit born from decades of experience. We battle the conditions again and again because growing crops here isn't just what we do, it's who we are. We're raised to adapt just like you, with varieties grown specifically for your local conditions. Visit provenseed.ca/raised to adapt to hear our story.
I get to spend every day talking to farmers in the ag industry through RealAgriculture.com and RealAg Radio. But nothing is more fun than speaking to an audience live and in person. If you're planning an ag event, book a Real Agriculture speaker to make it a successful and memorable experience. Email shaney@realagriculture.com and you can book myself or any other Real Ag personality to speak at your event. Bring your audience all the fun, insight, and energy of Real Agriculture. We are back here on RealAg Radio. Lyndsey, shed some light on us. Who is bringing this segment to us?
Oh, I'm excited to announce FP Genetics. FP Genetics brings new seed genetics to Canadian farms, empowering growers to thrive in ever-changing conditions. Visit fpgenetics.ca and join thousands of Canadian growers who trust FP Genetics to deliver innovative, reliable, hybrid fall rye seed genetics season after season. Experience the next wave.
Nice. Go to FP Genetics. I like that.
That
hybrid fall rye is doing really well. I've heard a lot of positive stuff from growers there on the Farmer Rapid Fire throughout the weeks. Kelvin, we got tariffs, new tariffs. It seems like tariffs. This time it's China applying a 76% tariff on Canadian canola seed. This is on top of the tariffs that are already on top of meal and oil. That's going back to March. I guess a lot of calls this week from Premier Moe, industry reps basically saying that, listen, the Canadian government, you've chosen autos, the EV sector, over canola. Is that the case?
I think that is the case in many ways. China is responding to the 100% tariffs that Canada put on Chinese electric vehicles, steel and aluminum last fall on October 1st. And so that was the case when those tariffs were announced back in March on the canola oil, meal, peas, pork, and seafood. And China took it to another level this week, which I think the timing maybe came as a bit of a surprise as I think people were expecting it to, the 1 year announcement of the anti-dumping investigation, the 1 year anniversary would be in September. And so this is the preliminary ruling from China's Ministry of Commerce to put this 76% tariff on canola. They could adjust it here in the next month to 7 months because it could go up to an 18-month period. Canada has an opportunity, though, to rethink and review its EV tariffs as when those took effect on October 1st, there's a clause in that regulation that says there's to be reviewed within the next year before the next 12 months are up. So I wonder if China's playing into that timing. And again, there's lots of calls from our fellow farmers and people in the ag industry, politicians, especially in Western Canada, calling on the Canadian government to address this. And I am in many ways surprised that the Carney government, Minister MacDonald, they've acknowledged it. Carney sent out a tweet about it yesterday. MacDonald was part of a statement with the trade minister. I'm surprised they're not, at least for political perception, trying to appear more busy on this.
There is stuff happening. I two people confirmed for me the meetings that were happening yesterday. So there's stuff, but I agree with you. Yeah. They're not communicating on it.
And if it's because of the Chinese way of negotiating, which is an excuse or a reason, justification that people have given in the past, that China likes to negotiate in quiet, they are outside of the spotlight, they don't like to have blunt public discourse back and forth in the media, that type of thing, they could say that. Minister MacDonald could say, hang on, we're working on this, everybody. This isn't the way the Chinese government operates. We can't do this in public. Minister MacDonald hasn't said that. So to me, there's opportunity here that they could at least be more, again, to use the word transparent again, transparent in messaging and communications around this and show some more. I think farmers in Western Canada, the canola industry, would feel some at least respect and acknowledgement if that was the case.
Now, Lyndsey, we're going to have a bit of a sidebar here. I don't know if you noticed this. Those of you watching on video probably caught it as well, that when Kelvin said that the Carney government chose autos over agriculture, Lyndsey, I don't know if you saw, but Tyler really shook his head. I think he disagrees, Lyndsey.
And so it begins. All right, Tyler.
So it begins.
Yeah,
I think that the problem is that Kelvin's fallen into the trap that a lot of other people have fallen into this week, thinking this is about canola versus EV tariffs, right? Ultimately, this is about China versus the United States. And the challenge that the federal government faces is that this is not about protecting EV jobs in Ontario. This is about protecting our relationship with the United States. These tariffs were put in place to match the U.S. approach. If you go back to when these were first put in place, it was Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives that called for these to be put in place first. And if you look and listen to a lot of what Donald has said over the last couple of months, it is partly concerns about Canada as a dumping ground for cheap Chinese goods. And so there is a bit of a question around how do we find the right way to manage the relationship with China without alienating the United States. And I think that we all play in a bit to the Chinese cards by making this about canola versus EV tariffs. This is not about that. This is about how do we manage our bilateral relationships at the end of the day.
Those aren't different. That's the same thing.
Yeah,
it's the same thing. It's canola versus the North American auto market. It's not Canadian EV production. It's canola versus the North American auto market is the choice that they've made, and that is ultimately a China versus U.S. decision. And in the long run, Canada will always choose the U.S. and has to choose the U.S. on that.
Well, and so to that point, this is where I think I am really disappointed in Carney and Carney's comms on this. Is that, to me, you can say how China negotiates whatever. To me, this is an opportunity to actually be on side with the U.S., like to further explain, to shed some light on Canada's positioning on this and use it to exactly show Trump that, like we are on side here. We're working on this. We have similar goals. Like, to me, this is an opportunity that Carney is not taking. And yes, that sort of trickles down to, our ag minister and those sorts of things. But like, I honestly, in watching media this week, on one hand, it's been great to see so many canola fields and also fields that aren't canola being called canola fields on mainstream media. But, it's been great to hear from people across the landscape about how important canola is, et cetera. But we're missing one of the key factors here, and we're missing our leader, our prime minister, actually speaking up.
Yeah, well, Kelvin, I think
Canada played. Go ahead, Shaun.
Kelvin, I was going to say, I think Lyndsey forgot about elbows up.
I have not seen said elbows. That is my point.
There's an opportunity here. What if Shaun's not going to like this idea? What if Carney announces we're dropping the tariffs, we're going to zero? Howard Lutnick calls and says, "What are you doing? You're messing up our auto sector in Detroit by dropping the tariffs to zero." And Carney and Ambassador Hillman can say, "Well, better treat us more nicely in our negotiations then.
So wouldn't that be an elbow? But I see no elbows. Yeah. So this is what
I just
I'm
don't
saying.
think
Like,
it's a risk that is so high risk, low reward.
Okay, or the other way, why are we not saying, hey, U.S., Fortress North America, we're on side, this is why we're doing it. And
so
reminding Canada why we're doing it.
I agree.
Well, exactly. But isn't like that sort of it is what a prime minister has to do. You have to deliver news that not everyone's going to like, because that's leadership. You have to make the best call for your country, and not everyone's going to agree. But just being silent doesn't, and not silent, but yeah.
Again, in the prime minister's defense, his statement that did come out, and took longer to come out than it should have, was better than the statement that came out from his trade and agriculture ministers. I think you could read the PM statement that he put out and at least kind of understand what he's getting at. Again, I consider myself a pretty sophisticated guy, and I'm not fully sure I understand the points that the trade and agriculture ministers were trying to put across. And again, I think that's part of the issue, is that it seems like the ministers that should be kind of have their sleeves rolled up and working on this day to day haven't got their head fully wrapped around this. You talked about the surprise of the timing. The fact that it happened isn't a huge surprise. Everybody knew this was coming. If you look at our exports to China for the first 6 months of the year, they were down because exporters knew that this could happen at any time, and they didn't want to get canola there. And so the fact that it took 24 hours basically for that call to get organized with the industry. If you look at, it took them 12 hours to put out their statement. Like, I'm a bit surprised that they were not more primed for action to respond to this. And I'm a bit surprised that we haven't had more clear communications around what the response will be. That said, I think going back to associations, the industry associations themselves were a little bit slow, and I'm not sure that they've been as clear publicly around what they want government to do either. I know that there's lots of work going on behind the scenes right now where they're talking about these things, but I think that there's some missed opportunities for them to be a little bit louder on things like, how do we better protect the domestic biodiesel market than they have been to date? And I think it's others that are stepping up and filling that gap rather than the industry itself.
Well,
looking back,
go ahead, Kelvin. Go ahead.
Looking back, there were a couple hints. Another hint we could have read the tea leaves on here was that Australia's market access into China there were some new developments in terms of that reopening about 3 weeks ago. And that would have been an indicator, or at least at the time, and I think some people did read that as, that's probably not great news for Canada's market access, so that Australia's reopening. But what do you guys think the options are here for the Carney government? Do you drop the EV tariffs and upset the U.S. administration? Do you go to China and appear busy but get rejected or accused of not respecting China? Poilievre is calling for cancellation of this BC ferry loan guarantee. I'm not sure. Does that send a message? There's also, and we could also take the European approach, which was to implement, originally their tariffs were, I believe, up to 45%. And I don't believe there's been any WTO complaint filed over that as opposed to Canada's. Is that the most likely scenario here, Tyler?
Again, so keep in mind, part of the issue is Canada did not follow the right process when it first put its tariffs in place. That Canada, again, kind of, I think, got forced to act rather than go through the mechanics that they should. I don't think, Kelvin, that those actions are all like, I think it could be a bit of all of the above. I think Canada does need to figure out how to re-engage. I think the Prime Minister has made efforts to do that. He's had calls with his counterpart that we haven't seen happen historically. I do think that there needs to be more of that effort. I do think that we do need to see the government take some steps on used cooking oil imports, for example, to better protect that biodiesel market. I think that that's an easy thing that they could do to protect this. I do think that we need to kind of see where are we going on the U.S. relationship. We've gone through this August 1st tariff date, and it's been this lull that we're in now, and I'm not sure how long that lasts. I think that we need to see that play out. And I think that they should cancel the BC Ferries loan, but that's just like, I think they should do that anyways.
We're moving too slowly. We should have been talking about this UCO issue going back 6, 9, 12 months when NOPA and the RFA were all talking about this issue. And if we're going to be like, there's like this lack of reality that we're just not willing to acknowledge about how important renewable diesel and hopefully SAF is to canola. And the whole purpose here, whether it's the American soybean or it's the Canadian canola, The whole purpose here is a hedge, a risk mitigation strategy for domestic consumption against having to be reliant on China buying in massive quantities to take the crop off our hand. I don't know why we seem scared, timid, not willing to actually talk about these things in the open. And when I say that, I mean in Canada. In the US, they're talking about it all in the open. In Canada, we're just not willing to do it. I do not understand.
I think it's that, and I mean, I've made this observation before that, so there's several parts to this. I think that some people would have probably been surprised to learn I think a lot of people thought China was our biggest market. It's a huge
100%.
market.
I agree.
It's not our biggest market. The U.S. is our biggest market. And I really think that probably surprises some people. And it means that, and we've covered it here at Real Agriculture on the show through all the media that we do. I think we've done a really good job trying to keep up with changes in the U.S. because they have such a huge impact on the Canadian market. But like biofuels for a lot of Western Canadian farmers is still a four-letter word.
Yep.
And we have to square that circle somehow.
Just before we take a break here, I think here's a bad case scenario. You remove the EV tariffs. China doesn't change the policy right away on their tariffs on canola immediately. And then you make the White House mad, and the White House says, you know what? Remember Canada, you were talking about this whole like change in the RIN value we let you be a domestic feedstock. Maybe we need to change that. And on top of it, we need to make sure that we do not move the RIN value to 100%. We keep it at 50. Then Canada's got struggles with both of its main markets.
Exactly.
And then we're really talking about compensation. We got to take a break. We'll maybe hit the compensation when we come back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM. Built on over 100 years of seed innovation and unwavering commitment to farmers, Pioneer 100 Series canola hybrids deliver a step change in yield performance and agronomic traits. This isn't just better canola. It's different canola. Pioneer 100 Series. Contact your local Pioneer sales representative or visit pioneer.com/100 series to learn more today.
It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, channel 147, Sirius XM. Don't worry, Shaun Haney, your host, is still here, but he's given me the open here because I had an epiphany. Kelvin, during that last segment, you found the Easter eggs to the canola market, to these Chinese tariffs. Totally in line with Taylor Swift's announcement this week of album. There were Easter eggs for the life of a showgirl everywhere. Some maybe dating back 3 years. So you, Kelvin, are our honorary Taylor Swift Easter egg finder of the canola market.
Oh, man.
Congratulations.
Wow.
Congratulations.
I'm probably the one who spent the least time listening to Taylor Swift on that spot on the Spotify account here of our group. So
yeah, probably. But
sure
well
what
done.
That involves.
Yeah. Oh, no. Easter. Okay. Mastermind. She has been hinting at this whole album for years. And so this is what you need to do, Kelvin. You need to drop everything. And from now on, you need to be looking for Easter eggs on what decisions China is going to make. And just think, what would Taylor Swift do? And then go. This is perfect.
Apparently
carrying on.
Apparently she's going to book, she's doing negotiations to have a stint at the Sphere in Vegas. Just imagine what those tickets are going to cost. McCann, you want to say something too?
I'm hard to follow up on Taylor Swift. To be honest, it's throwing me for a loop where Lyndsey.
I love
Lyndsey went. Yes, McCann. Again, so what I was going to say is that I think that Western Canadian farmers really are part of the reason why they haven't talked about biodiesel. And I think, that this, as much as we talk about, again, we don't understand the U.S. is the number one market. I don't think that many people are aware that the Imperial Oil facility at Strathcona, that facility alone will take half of the canola seed that that China takes, and Western Canadian farmers need to get over their aversion to the clean fuel standard. As much as I've heard a lot of them and seen a lot of them criticize that and get caught up in partisan attacks on it, it is a critical component of driving demand for stable domestic demand. And I think that they need to have their own epiphany and realize that is part of the solution, and protecting and promoting the clean fuel standard is something that they need to get behind.
So as the token Western Canadian farmer on this panel, then, which risk is worse? The policy risk of continually having to lobby government to maintain biofuel mandates as the U.S. and as the U.S. corn grower and soybean grower groups continually do, or the risk of losing export market access? I think export market access is more out of your control, but there's still policy risk on the other.
And again, I don't think that you see it as it should not be an either or, right? The ideal outcome for Western Canadian farmers is that you have reliable market access and you have a strong, stable domestic supply, and then you have choice, right? That's what will drive prices up. That's what takes the volatility out of the market. And I think for too long, the view has been market access is the only option.
Yep.
We have not put the focus on strong, stable domestic supply, and that needs to be, we need to go back to that basic kind of outcome. One of the things I think is interesting that we may still get there, maybe this will get us there earlier, exports of canola may decrease. Like, I think that in Canada, we always kind of see this world where exports go up year over year over year. Actually, we would be a little bit better off if our exports went down. And now it shouldn't go down because China's cut us out of the market. That's not a good situation. But if they go down because we're using more of that product domestically, we're reducing our exposure to exchange rate risk, we're reducing our exposure to market access risk, then that's a good thing, and that's a smart strategy. And again, the clean fuel standard is part of that.
Why am I agreeing with Tyler McCain so much?
But this is just a Hallmark show, really. Also, Epiphany, great song by Taylor Swift. Okay, but the uncomfortable truth for Western Canadian canola growers is that they function in a biofuel-based industry, whether they like it or not, and whether they want it as domestic policy or not, as evidenced by exactly that, who our number one customer is, and it's the U.S. So, yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
Great point. Yes. And to Kelvin's question, here's how I would answer Kelvin on the either or. And I agree that with Tyler that it's not an either or in my mind, but there are differences. The China market is come and go. China will come back to the table to get canola when they maybe actually need canola or they want the canola. And it's going to be an up and down relationship like it always is with China. The U.S. biofuel policy and the access to that market as it applies to domestic feedstocks and the RIN values, that is much more systemic long-term demand that is going to be much more consistent over the years to come in comparison to the China market in my mind. Does that make sense, Kelvin?
Yeah, I agree to some extent it is, but it's not completely locked in either. There's continually the negotiations and the cliffhangers as to whether they're going to renew something or whether that RFS or whatever the latest update's going to be, what the RIN value assignments are going to be. All those types of uncertainties still exist when you have that domestic market. Sure, it probably is less overall risk and uncertainty than relying on an inconsistent buyer, massively volatile buyer like China, but you still have some policy that farmers in the market has to navigate on that front. It's not all locked in.
While we're airing grievances, one of the things that I wish we would stop, honestly, I've seen this from individual farmers, even some farm groups, is that farmers need predictable, stable markets. Ship sailed. That can't be our ask anymore.
And as soon as we have that, we capitalize it, and it goes into the value of our land and our assets. So, yeah, I agree. But at the same time, we want stability is ultimately what you need to
rules-based
investments.
This is Kelvin's supply management bias coming out. He just wants everything to be very predictable.
All I know is earlier in the show, Tyler was singing Carney's praises. So I would just like to point that out for everybody else.
I heard that.
I heard it.
I actually had it marked down in my notebook.
Again,
people don't make investments if they don't know that they can make money off them.
Yes.
Well, but they do, Kelvin, because that's the way markets typically work, is that there's a sense of understanding what the risk and volatility that you face. I mean, one of the challenges that we're in today is that the world is different, right? And And what you need to do is understand that even if Canada didn't have EV tariffs, China, if it wanted to, would kick Canadian canola out of it, right? I mean, China does this. They've got a great track record of this. That's the way that it works. That's what's baked into it.
Use beef as the example.
So we can focus on the EV tariffs, but the bottom line is that China will always be a very unpredictable market, regardless of what the Canadian government is doing. And that's, again, we need to figure out these other strategies at the end of the day.
For sure. Okay, you know what? We're going to have to leave the discussion about compensation, and I got some questions for Kelvin about the WASD report as we break this down. We're going to have to do that in the bonus. I'm sorry, everybody. I apologize. That's just the way it goes. That means you got to download the RealAg Radio podcast. Hey, Tyler, have yourself a great weekend.
All right. Thanks, Sean.
Kelvin, all the best.
It's our local 4-H Achievement Day. We're excited.
Oh, nice. Love 4-H. Yes. Well, I heard about on yesterday's show, there was a big dairy youth show in Rimbey, I think it was. We heard about yesterday on the show as well. It's great to get those kids on the animal husbandry and all those kind of life lessons. Kelvin, all the best to you.
Thank you. We'll make sure the kids work hard in the barn this weekend.
Lyndsey, great perspectives.
Yeah, thanks. This was a really good one for me.
It was a lot of fun.
Acknowledging that.
Hey, if you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Thanks so much, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. Have yourselves a great weekend. Cheers. Today was a spirited affair. I loved it. And it's always great because, it's sort of similar to we talk about farm groups, and sometimes you got to have a little bit of friction. I think that's also true with panels like this. It's good. It's really good to get some of those different thoughts out there and drive this whole discussion forward. So I appreciate the panel being willing to do that. One of the big calls here, and we can use canola as the example, but there are others. When we do have trade issues, the calls for compensation. And we heard about it in March when China first put the tariffs on the pork, seafood, and oil and meal for canola. And then like 7 days later, futures price was actually back through where the price originally was on that Friday. Possibly a little bit of a cry wolf scenario, but others had said, hey, just imagine what the price would have been had those tariffs not been in place. So there's different ways to look at it. We're already hearing this week about the need for compensation in this case. Lyndsey, Chris Davison said to you, essentially this shuts Canada out of the Chinese market. I guess, Lyndsey, do you think there should be compensation, or what are your thoughts or considerations?
Well, so I'm not going to give my own personal opinion. I'm going to maybe put this out here. The supply managed industries get lots of compensation when trade deals get done, and maybe that access isn't even granted. So, and this is just to make Kelvin very angry. But it does seem on the grain side, at least, that it seems pretty much like pulling teeth to get any sort of compensation on the grain side. And yet other industries seem to get checks delivered pretty easily. So I'll just put that one out there and see what Tyler and Kelvin think about that.
No, two wrongs don't.
Whoa. Kelvin needs to defend himself here.
Okay, it's not a personal attack on Kelvin.
No, I know. But
okay.
Go ahead, Kelvin.
Anyway.
No, I actually don't disagree a whole lot there. In terms of, it is hard to measure what the impact is in terms of the real world impact. Sure, that was part of a trade agreement. Those settlements were part of getting a trade agreement across the finish line. And so I think that is maybe a slightly different scenario here. I don't know how the canola industry, we saw another industry, for example, would be lumber. Carney announced compensation the Carney government announced compensation for lumber very promptly after the Trump administration escalated those tariffs on softwood lumber. And so there is a parallel there more recent than the supply management compensation. And the Conservative Party has called for the EV tariff proceeds, which I believe Tyler can maybe correct me, is it around $100 million that have been collected or something like that on the EV tariffs? In reality, that maybe that's potential collection, I'm not sure. That could go to canola growers. Of course, that won't offset the loss of a $5 billion market, but it's complicated. How do you make that measurement as to what the real market impact is at the farm gate and to the industry, and what's the mechanism for doing that? In the U.S., we've seen, of course, the Trump administration just write checks and announce enormous programs. But again, the U.S. is different than Canada in terms of the clout that the farm lobby has in terms of selecting who is in power, that type of thing. So we generally haven't seen that in in Canadian agriculture, and I think at least a token of something would, I think, be appreciated. Wouldn't surprise me if we see increases to the cash advance program again, ad hoc increases to the cash advance on a yearly basis again, something like that. But I think the industry is probably hoping for more, although many farmers say just resolve this. Don't send us a check in the mail.
And there's an interesting dynamic, right, where if you go back to protecting the biodiesel market, if you could keep used cooking oil, that probably will do more for Western Canadian farmers than the checks that the government would send. But there's this political perception in Ottawa, but also on farms across the country, that like what they're looking for is a check, and that puts the government in a difficult situation. I mean, I always think that both supply management and what happens in the United States are really bad precedents for what to look for, because I'm not sure that in the long run, these big checks that Congress is sending farmers is actually good for American agriculture. Like there are some structural issues that need to be addressed. And you look at the amount of corn acres that are getting planted and how those markets are getting flooded because farmers they plant and they know the government will bail them out at the end of the day. I'm not sure that that's in farmers' interest. And the issue with this is that the canola market recovers. And I think that that's something that farmers and politicians in Western Canada don't fully appreciate, is that the impact on canola is different than steel or auto, where they may be facing the end of the industry in Canada. What we're looking at in canola is likely some market disruption, but likely not kind of a shuttering of a sector. And that's different.
Oh, what is going on today? Is it like Friday the 13th? No, it's the 15th.
It's
I don't know why.
Friday the 15th is just as scary, apparently.
Yeah. So Tyler, I agree. I think the comparison to steel and aluminum is different. They are fighting a different battle there. I'll say this. I do think there should be compensation, but not the kind of compensation that maybe was being asked for. I think instead of it being a per acre payment, or some sort of like how many tons you sold or intended to sell or whatever that looks like, I think it needs to be going into programming in regards to risk management. We have to get off of this hook and addiction where production contracts are our only way to mitigate risk. We have to move where we're using more things like options and futures contracts. The reality is the fact that there's a tariff on canola seed should be a surprise to no one. And I know that the timing sucks because of the 2021 drought. There's a lot of people that don't even want to sign a production contract because they want to know what quantity they have out in their field, get it through the combine first. And so this really showcases and identifies our lack of full use of the tools that are available to mitigate price declines in the short term or the long term. And I think that has really been exposed here. And I think we need money going into some programming to move this forward for the longer term, is my thoughts.
Yeah, and there are ways that they can do it, right? And so if you do want to compare Canada to the United States, there are some really simple models of how you use a government backstop to encourage more risk management tools being made available to farmers. So much easier to get margin insurance or kind of a forward-looking protection in the United States than it is in Canada. We just have held on to this really what I would consider a pretty broken framework of crop insurance and agro-stability and agro-invest for far too long. And like at a certain point in time, we're going to realize that the risks that farmers face aren't what they were 25 years ago when that framework was built. And we need to tear it down and build something different back up again so that farmers can actually get risk management tools that reflect the realities that they farm in today.
Kelvin, cash advance payment program, we could increase the amount, but we could also get more farmers to use the bloody thing.
True. I do find it interesting that just like 5-10 minutes ago, you and Tyler were saying risk management and stability were bad things, and now you're saying that we need to focus more on tools that bring more risk management.
No, those are different things.
No, and let me be clear. I think that the farmer's first line of defense on risk management should always be the farmer and the farm business decisions that they make every day. You may think that government's job is to manage risk for farmers, but I don't think that that's the way that it is. I think that should be the farmer's job.
Oh, I agree. But then crop insurance and agro-stability, what are those?
Those are risk management tools, right? And farmers need to understand how they are and how they work and
that are
how they can be
subsidized,
used.
funded by government.
But it's also like the same on this whole, like the whole news this week of the WASD, right? We got a 188.8 on the predicted corn yield as of August 1st. They found, a couple million more acres. We're looking at like a 2 billion bushel, 2.5 billion bushel potential carryout. And on top of that, I heard, Pete Meyer from Muddy Boots Marketing, I heard him yesterday on AgriTalk's PM show, where he talked about how they think they're underestimating the South American crop as well. Even if the corn yield comes back to 185, he doesn't change his world balance sheet on corn. It's the same as it is today with the current numbers that are being used by the World Board. So even in that situation, it's like, okay, so sell some of the crop if you need some cash, buy some calls to participate in the upside if the market goes up. Like these are the things that are happening on some farms. And I just think overall, there has to be a better understanding of some of the tools.
So are you saying this compensation for China blocking Canadian canola should go into like seminars on hedging?
To help people. Yeah, we got to do some teaching. We do.
Do you want to start a podcast?
Well, I'm going to, I know, listen, this is going to fall on so many bloody deaf ears because that's not what people want. People just want, they want some money.
So again, let me take some distance from and leave him out on the limb a little bit on that. I will agree that actually government could put a little bit of money into more proactive education about risk management. That would be a good thing. That should not be seen as compensation for what's going on in China. That's just, I think, a smart investment for government. But again, I think that we need to, what this is an example of that this is ultimately a risk management framework, right? Like this is all of these things happening together at the same time that we need to be thinking about.
Well, we've solved that problem.
We have not. No.
I mean, I think Kelvin's solution was supply management for everything. I'm not sure that that's it, but
I don't think he said that. I don't.
Sure I said that exactly. That's the exact.
Yes, that is a direct quote. Yeah.
Lyndsey, one of the interesting things that is, in the comparison between Canada and the U.S. is what's happening in the machinery industry. And although farmers in both countries have said, leading into the year had said, hey, listen, I'm backing off machinery purchases for sure. The American farmer definitely has. The Canadian farmer has not, relatively speaking to 2024. And if you look at the kind of the 5-year average, and if you look at the last 5 years of individual data, the U.S. takes a real blip lower, whereas Canada's kind of tracking to where we have been. So there's definitely a difference there. I'm not sure what has forced Canadian farmers to change their minds or what has allowed them to do that, but it's definitely different.
It is a bit of a head scratcher, and I'm looking forward to seeing sort of how it shakes out over the next few months. In that, I mean, we know that decisions made around equipment, exactly that, they can reflect how farmers are feeling about their cash positions, their outlook, just generally the economy in going forward, right? And so the fact that new equipment sales, at least to those were July numbers, I think. Like I'm quite surprised because they're still lofty based on a pretty lofty average, right? So like they're keeping pace with the 5-year average, which is a pretty strong one. So that makes sense from 4 years ago. It doesn't really make sense to me now. So I'm not sure what's at play here, and I don't know if maybe we just see it fall apart in a bigger, more dramatic fashion later in the year. I'm not sure. And I overlay it with like the CFSI data that we got into, and it just I don't know. It just doesn't seem to entirely make sense.
Well, we do know that 56% of Canadian farmers say their current financial situation is good to excellent. Now that's down from 60% back in April. So there is a decline there.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure. But there's this whole conversation happening in the US about, are we in an ag recession? Actually, the monthly ag economist monitor that Farm Journal does, less economists believe that there's an ag recession today than back a couple months ago, which is kind of interesting and quite a change in that fact. If you look at the July versus the April. Sorry, Tyler, go ahead.
Well, but I think that the 49th parallel makes a big difference there, Shaun. Right? Like I guess you have to wonder what all is at risk over the next 6 to 12 months in Canada, depending on what happens with the United States. And so much of this comes down into kind of attitude and perception. And if we start to see USMCA access put at risk, I don't know, all bets are off, and things will change. We were talking about some of the breaks, right? It's not just every Canadian farmer will be impacted if something crazy happens there, and so there may be some optimism today, but you really do wonder, like, if we think that the China decision will have an impact on markets, if USMCA gets ripped up, I mean, yeah, that's again, hopefully that doesn't happen, but again, I wouldn't read too much into the likelihood of or not of an ag recession in Canada until we know what's going to happen.
Yeah, so much of that answer to that question is really tied into that. What happens with the USMCA, CUSMA agreement? I think that's very accurate, Tyler. Sorry, Kelvin, go ahead.
I don't know if I have much to add. I'm with Lyndsey. I think that it's perplexing why Canadian sales have been distinctly stronger than U.S. machinery sales so far this year on the new side of things. And maybe it's a sample size issue too, where we don't there's more room for outliers in the smaller Canadian market in terms of data. But I'm not sure whether it's currency related and the weakness of the Canadian dollar, which hasn't actually been that weak lately, or there's other factors. Maybe I'm not sure whether there's more farmers are in a better financial, or we're in a better financial position. I'm not sure about that. I don't know if there's much argument for that. There's also potential around timing here with inventory and tariffs coming. Maybe dealers moved equipment north of the border ahead of time to get ahead of tariffs and things like that. Maybe there's timing factors like that as well.
Yeah, but that's still a U.S. thing too. Like that the whole timing thing is just as much of an American farmer thing as Canadian, right?
I don't know. I guess there's the scenario where, like, from a Canadian farmer's perspective, maybe it's you make the decision to buy the equipment because we don't know what's going to happen going forward. And again, that's what I mean by, like, let's see what happens in the next 3 months, because it is entirely possible that maybe there was, some pressure to make the call, like, actually do, who knows? It's perplexing to me.
So Tyler alluded to the possibility of USMCA and CUSMA being ripped up, and to me, there's been increasing concern coming, especially out of Ottawa, about that, or pundits or the commentariat around Ottawa about that. To me, it has shown over the last number of months to be one of the more untouchable things that Trump when it comes to Trump's view of trade policy, is that the North American trade arrangement, it is one of the things that has lasted and that he hasn't torn up. And I wonder whether there is the potential of too much pain domestically in the U.S., whether that is something that he's actually willing to go that far and be that extreme, because the cost it could take on especially certain states and certain U.S. industries.
Yeah, I've kind of wondered what, to that effect, that delaying push. That's why Mexico and Canada have been pushed out on some of this stuff, is trying to see where some of the inflationary pressure potentially lands. Because one of the key things they want to happen from a policy perspective is the Fed to start to lower rates. And the PPI number from earlier this week was not conducive to rates going lower, right? Now it is one data point, but it was definitely, Powell probably had his chest a little bit puffed when he heard some of those numbers, right? And we're just at the beginning of some of those tariffs actually even being put into place. But they are having, John Deere, in their earnings report, they revised their earnings forecast down. They're forecasting somewhere between $500 and $600 million in tariffs in this fiscal year for them alone. Now, also their net income was revised down to $4.75 to $5.25 billion. So I'm not sure $500 million in tariffs maybe is that big of a dent as it first sounds when I say that. But
they're talking about restructuring. They're talking about restructuring, which means layoffs.
Well, and so that was interesting from that earnings report as they revised down. The interesting piece was so far they have absorbed any sort of tariff. And many companies are going through this. We've absorbed it to now. Will we going forward? And there's a whole bunch of debate in that. There's two choices. One, increase price for the consumer. Two, start cutting costs. Sounds like John Deere's choosing the cost option, because in the ag market, especially with machinery, you look at like U.S. combines, I think off my memory here, down like 38% year to date. Okay. So we're not exactly in a market where you can afford to increase the price of those combines. So you've got to deal with the cost side of the equation, and that puts them in a real bind.
But I'm not sure that again, I think as much as all of these things probably do explain part of the reason why CUSMA has not been touched and that there's a bit of a reluctance to go too far down that. There's a lot more options, I think, that get to be at play when you look at a comprehensive trade negotiation that we will get forced into than what we've seen today, right? Like this will be a different experience than these, napkin negotiations that have happened that haven't been trade negotiations in the kind of the traditional sense. The CUSMA renewal will be, and it's inevitable. And again, it's hard to imagine, based on what we've seen, that you will come through that review without a tariff baked into the deal and without potential other further disruption. And I think the question always just gets to be, is the tariff that gets baked into it, does it still protect the advantage that Canada has? Because that's really what matters. It's not, is the tariff 0, 5, or 10, but is it, the same as everybody else, or 5 or 10 or 20% better? And what does that mean for that market, and how does that play out?
Yeah.
And kind of what does the timing and phase in of it look? And again, you've just got to think that as it becomes a little bit clearer what all of that looks like, this will seep into the kind of the farmer sentiment and the attitude of value chains and of governments, and we just don't know today. But I get the sense that I think that it will actually be in 2026 when we have a clear sense as to what that looks like, because the U.S. government's been a bit slower on that, right?
The later the better, because Shaun mentioned the producer price index numbers this week. There's increasing numbers of data, or there's an increasing number of data points that show that I think the people that are doing the victory lap saying that tariffs haven't caused inflation and tariffs haven't caused a recession or anything like that, I think it's early. Be patient here, because those data points are starting to come in now that the tariffs are not accomplishing the main goals that the Trump administration said it would. And I think with passing time here, I'm not sure how quickly, but to Canada's negotiating position, the longer it takes to work on a deal, the more that pain is going to be felt in the U.S.
But we can't acknowledge the fact that we have not seen inflation at the speed and the rate at which many people were predicting. And I think what's caught people
tariffs haven't taken effect either. It's all perception. People said they would the inflation would happen after the tariffs took effect. Well, the tariffs, a lot of them have only taken effect in the last 2 weeks.
I don't think anybody. Well, I don't think anybody predicted the companies would absorb the tariffs like they have initially.
Oh, exactly that.
That is
the inventory stocking that happened beforehand. So all the inventories, businesses.
But John Deere's not inventory stocking. They've already paid $200 million in tariffs this year. So they're not. That's not stocking.
Absorbing the tariffs and running through your inventory that you stocked up before the tariffs is not sustainable. Businesses are going to have to start laying people off once they reach the end of the rope there.
And again, I don't think people predicted that the president would chicken out the way that he did over and over and over again for the first 6 months. Right?
Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, his interview this week with Bloomberg Business Week addresses that, and he adamantly disagrees that there's been. And I obviously has a perspective. I encourage everybody to go listen to that TV interview. It is really interesting. Much more transparent, I would say, or maybe provides clarity, Lyndsey, in terms of how he feels about the negotiating.
Shaun, do you think that the president has chickened out over and over and over again?
I think he's I wouldn't say chickened out. I think so. Here's what I would say. It's a little bit like the ABP thing. When I saw ABP was going to withdraw, they announced the withdrawal. I didn't think they were withdrawing. So if they find a deal, did ABP chicken out? Well, no. And I think that's very, very much the style that it could be interpreted that way, and you could perceive it that way. It doesn't mean that's what actually the reality was.
But go ahead.
I just hope that ABP gets a better deal than what the president's been getting. But
Boeing would disagree.
There were a bunch of different things these tariffs were supposed to accomplish. Make foreign exporters pay. Well, here we are talking about John Deere and domestic companies absorbing the tariff costs.
They're paying.
Narrowing the U.S. trade deficit hasn't happened. No. Revitalizing U.S. manufacturing, that hasn't happened either. There's new data showing U.S. factories are in worse shape than they were before the tariff talks
by the
amplified.
rest of the world.
And the U.S. government deficit, it's in the trillions, massively in the trillions, and they're collecting. I'm sure the tariff collection amounts are significant, but not when you compare to the deficits and the amount that the deficit is.
Well, the tariff money's been spent like 3 or 4 times. Wiesmeyer, when he was earlier this week, we talked about it. We laughed about that.
And it's a smaller amount than needed to accomplish the goal there too.
Yeah. What I think is going to happen, I still believe this, we are going to see no federal income tax for people making under $75,000 or $80,000 a year. I'm putting my stake in the ground.
And then the rich Americans will still be better off because of the changes that Trump made.
That's their thing to talk. I'm just telling you what I think is going to happen. So, okay. Well, this has been fun.
Mm-hmm.
It's been good. I think now you've heard our perspectives. I think we would enjoy all of yours, and you can do that by sending me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or of course call that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks to everybody for tuning in and downloading this RealAg Radio podcast on a daily basis. We really do appreciate it. Have yourselves a great weekend, and we'll talk again next week. Cheers, everybody.